Greetings, I'm the One Good Horror Show and welcome to VG Therapy, the channel where I talk about games. Now, we're finally out of the HD trilogy and onto the first proper HD game in the series, Devil May Cry 4. This game, as I stated in my review of Devil May Cry 1, was the first game I ever played of the series. And this game actually led me to other aspects of the franchise, such as the Devil May Cry anime and the manga that never got finished. And I do remember enjoying those, and I do remember enjoying Devil May Cry 4, but I just never went back to play it again. Except for when the special edition got released 3 years ago, and I got about halfway through that, and I ended up dropping it because something came up. But since then, I've grown to understand how not only character action games are meant to be played, but how games are meant to be played as a whole. I've kind of understood that just finding the one thing that works for you and then just going with that isn't necessarily always the best way to play. And so because of that, that has led me to really want to explore this game again, to see how it holds up. And I'm kind of wondering, will it still hold up, even coming off 3, which was a fantastic game, or is it going to struggle like the developers did? Because for those of you who don't know, the developers actually did struggle quite a bit when making this game.
The original game came out in early 2008 and got a remaster in 2015. The original did well critically and is currently the best-selling title in the series. However, not everything was good. This was during the early days of the next console generation, so the team was trying to figure out what could and couldn't be done with the hardware, as the hype for the next console generation and a little bit of marketing led them to thinking that the consoles were stronger than they were, and that the people at home might not realize that, so while scaling things back, they also needed to make things look good, while at the same time figuring out what the hell they were going to do with the game. The team working on it is pretty much the exact same from last time, as a result of as soon as Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition was done, they pretty much started planning for the next one.
I've heard a lot of rumors about what could have gone wrong and what did go wrong and all that kind of stuff, but I've never been able to find anything concrete. The most concrete thing I could find was a panel done by Ruben Langdon, the voice actor for Dante, where he stated that the team were running out of time and ideas, which would seem to imply that it wasn't so much that things were getting cut, as people like to say, or rather just things weren't made in the first place. And you might be wondering, well, why is it that people were thinking things got cut or things didn't get made? Well, I'll get into that, because first we need to look at the story, and that will make everything clear.
The story opens up with our new protagonist, Nero, a man with a seemingly broken arm who takes on a bunch of demons.
Ah yes, getting right into it, are we? I'll admit, this is a bit faster than DMC 3, but I don't care, it's fun and they can do the setup afterwards.
Oh, no, we just watched that before going into a cutscene, which is just a church sermon that is spiced up by Nero being tsundere, and then spiced up by Dante, who kills the Pope and proceeds to fight Nero.
Now I find it kind of funny that they act like you have no idea who this guy is, but to be fair, when I was a kid and first playing this game, I did actually have no idea who the hell he was.
And during the tutorial, we find out that Nero's arm is perfectly fine, it's just demonic. And here brings up the question of, does he always have that sling to pretend that his arm is broken? Because judging from various context clues, he's always had this, so how has he hit it all this time? Or did he always have it but now it's just out of control? It's not very clear. But what is clear is how cool it is. It acts as a grab attack, and when locked on you can bring enemies closer to you. During the fight, a cutscene happens that not only makes the Fujoshi happy, but also marks us to what is now a series tradition. If you're one of the good ones, your opening has Dante getting impaled, to which he then brushes it off and mocks the person who did it. Then the first half of the game is basically just Nero chasing after Dante to figure out who he is and why did he kill the Pope. But during the first half, we are introduced to what really sets Nero apart from Dante. There is his devil arm that I already mentioned, but this is one of the things that makes me agree that in some respects, he plays better than Dante. I've mentioned this before, but many combos knock an enemy away, but with Nero's arm he could bring them back in, even in the air. He also plays a lot more aggressively, as seen with some of his pause combos, of which he has a lot more than Dante does, and has a unique feature with his sword. His sword has a motor or something in it because he can rev it up like a motorbike and charge up to 3 charges. These make your attacks stronger and faster and can change how some of the attacks work. Like his stinger equivalent and his launcher. His launcher, funnily enough, is actually used in some platforming, as it at level 3 actually launches you higher than you can jump normally, so to get some secrets you have to use it.
Now you might be wondering, how useful is it really, because it looks like it takes a while to charge up, so it would only really be useful at the start of fights and maybe during bosses. And you are correct in that assumption, but that's only if you can't get instant charging down.
When you attack, if you time it right and hit charge, you can get a charge off. And if you time it just right, you can get a max charge. I can usually get the first one off, but max charge I can rarely do. And you might be thinking, is that all he can do? Well, here's one feature that made me think that during boss fights at the very least, he is the best character in the series, which is his buster count. Most other clashes, encounters, and parries result in both characters being put in a neutral state. There are a few times where that is different, but from what I've seen, this is what normally happens. But with Nero, he actually goes into an animation that does a fair amount of damage to bosses, and some enemies. I personally love this because it feels a lot better than the parries I've had to do as Dante in both 3 and 4. And also, the reward is at the very least equal and just looks cooler, and if it's not, then it's just flat out better in every single way. Because some of them are just large amounts of damage and not much else. Some others actually put the boss in a stunned state that allows you to style more on the boss. I mean, hell, you can get this damaging grab by getting the boss in a stunned or dizzy state and then grabbing them there, and even if you bring up the fact that the other games have you work for your style ranking and damage when the boss is stunned, you can still do that, but this is just super cool. And also, Nero does in fact have a devil trigger, and that changes what attack he does. And I think it does a bit more damage, it might not, but it just feels like it does because it's even cooler and even more over the top.
At this point, I should probably start talking about the second half of the game, because while Nero is cool and he's great and all that, I feel like I can't get too much more in depth on what he can do, because he doesn't really get anything new throughout the story. He doesn't get any new weapons or what have you. Although he does have a lot more he can do with his sword than Dante ever could do, and I'll give him props for that, because yeah, he has a lot more abilities and techniques than base Dante has. But we're not talking about base Dante. We're talking about the Dante that makes up the second half of this game. Well, not quite second, but close enough.
Because on Mission 11, Nero gets captured, and so it's up to Dante to get him out. But first he needs to grab Yamato, Virgil's sword. However, it is at the church that the game starts at, and Dante is where Nero is now. So Dante needs to run back to get it, which one might think that the Talsa is going to be reused, but at different levels, like running through the jungle that Nero went through, but he goes through a different area. I mean, like, yeah, that's what would happen, yeah? They wouldn't make you just run backwards through all the levels you literally just did, would they? Why am I being made to run backwards through all the levels I literally just did?
Yeah, this is the game's biggest weak point. It makes you play the game twice, but just in reverse. It's kind of like when you play as Virgil in 3, where not much has changed. There's a few slight differences, but it's not really anything major, and you kind of just go, oh, I'm playing this game again in reverse. It has the exact same puzzles and the exact same bosses, just in reverse order.
Although you do skip that stupid dice puzzle. A puzzle that while playing as Nero you do twice, and all you do is hit a die to roll it, and if you know the trick you can get a guaranteed result, but otherwise you'll hope that the random result you get doesn't land you on a spot that forces you to fight enemies or have a hazard come out. And while you do want to land on the spot that will take you to a different part of the board, if you land on the later one it can take you back. And there are spots that do nothing and another that rains red orbs with a few green ones thrown in. It's still not fun. And when you have to play this again at the end of the game for the boss rush, meaning you have to play it multiple times before a boss, you have to land on the correct tile, otherwise you'll just do a loop.
And here's the idea where the gamer's unfinished comes from, because Dante has no exclusive levels or bosses. And like in 3, he gets weapons from the bosses he defeats, but unlike in 3, the weapons seem to have nothing to do with the bosses.
He gets a set of gauntlets and greaves from a boss that is a mix between a Lamia and a Dryad, a boss that doesn't punch and can't even kick, unlike Beowulf from 3 who at least uses his hands and feet. Next you have an anglerfish frog that uses sexy ice ladies as a lure that gets you a transforming rocket launcher. He shoots ice, but that's the closest thing I've got. Next is a weapon that I never quite got down how I was supposed to use it, because what it does is shoot out needles that either float there or get stuck in an enemy, and once you set them all you can detonate them. And he gets it from a demonic fire centaur.
And I did like the bosses. They were a bit more fun to fight as Nero because of the counters, but fighting them as Dante was still a lot of fun. But yeah, the weapons just seem kind of randomly attributed to these bosses. It seems almost like that there were bosses these weapons were meant to go with, but those bosses then got cut and were just randomly assorted to these 3. But as I said before, there's no basis for that, so I'm not too sure what happened. And even with the weapons we have and the bosses we have, they still could have made the connections a bit better.
Like have Gilgamesh, the gauntlets and greaves come from Burial, the fire boss, as some of the attacks have a steam effect which is close enough to fire, and the needle thing Lucifer could have come from Echidna, the plant boss, because the needles could be like rose thorns and when you detonate them you do it by throwing a rose, so you could have played that angle. Pandora can stay with Dagon because I've got nothing, because Pandora is a rocket launcher but its main gimmick is the fact that it transforms into other weapons, and none of the bosses have anything to do with that. Although since you do fight some of the church members like Agnes, and since he is the head researcher, you could have made it so that Pandora is one of the weapons he was researching. But he is the boss before getting Yamato, and since you get that there, and for Dante it is just before the last mission, which is just him finding the final boss to get ready for Nero, so in that case maybe not.
But I just came up with that in like a minute. Why wasn't there more to this? Why does it seem like the weapons and Dante as a whole were just kind of thrown in?
I mean, Dante is super fun to play. He basically has all of his stuff from DMC3, but this time with a new twist. In DMC3, Dante had 6 styles, 2 of which were unlockable and not that great. Here he has those original 4 and 1 unlockable one with Yamato, which doesn't suck. And unlike 3, you can swap between them on the fly. That's right, you can trickster dash to an enemy, then swordmaster on his face. This makes Dante a lot more fun to play because you can drastically change how you're playing mid-battle, and if you're good enough,
which I'm not,
then you can switch mid-combo.
Not only does this increase combo potential, but this also means that for all those moments in 3 where you wish you had access to all the cool tricks on the fly, you now do. And that's still a lot of fun. And while, yeah, Dante doesn't have that much in the way of levels, weapons, plot relevance, although he does kind of kick things off, so I guess he is a little bit plot relevant. But let me think, there's a few other things. I know, plot relevance, weapons, and levels.
Even though those are all weak, he is still super fun to play. And honestly, I prefer him over Nero because I'm not going to claim that Dante has more going on mechanically than Nero because I would have no idea. But with Nero, I found myself getting into patterns of combo strings which I would then piece together to get high scores. Whereas Dante, I always felt that I was doing something new, I was figuring out what would be best for every opportunity. Even if I wasn't, it just felt better to play. Even for the feeling of knowing that there's more you can do. With Nero, it didn't feel like there was that much more for me to figure out. I felt that I kind of worked out all of his tech and all there was left for me to do was get better at fighting enemies. But Dante felt like I wasn't even scratching the surface of what he could do, and that just resonated with me more. And this kind of pissed me off because I was playing through the game and I wanted to play as Dante in the harder modes, but I also had to play as Nero, and I had to play as Nero first. So I gave up about halfway through Dante Must Die mode because I was struggling super hard as Nero, so I couldn't really see if I was that much better as Dante.
It would have been better if I could play as Dante in the different difficulties because, let's be honest, this game should have been twice as long and have Dante be a bonus mode like Virgil in 3, because that's basically what it is. But the difference is that, say for example in 3, where you have one save for each brother, you know, Dante and Virgil, but you had to play as one to unlock the difficulty for the other. If you wanted to play as hard mode in Virgil, you had to beat it as Dante first. And well, yeah, if you unlock Dante Must Die mode as Dante, have it unlocked for both, but allow me to play as the character I want, in the difficulty that I want.
Because yeah, if you want to play certain levels and harder difficulties, most games will tell you to play the whole thing again. But this does have a mission select, and I beat the game on almost every other difficulty, so the least you could do is let me play as the character I want on the difficulty that I want without having me to play as the character I don't want to on the difficulty that I don't want.
Like, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy playing as Nero, but I prefer playing as Dante. And so I just really want to play as Dante on the harder difficulties. And it's just something that just really just annoys me because, like in Resident Evil 2, you can play as either character first in whatever order you want, and it's fine. And in, for example, Street Fighter, imagine if you wanted to play as Chun-Li, you had to beat each difficulty as Ryu first. That would be just obnoxious and annoying. And the thing is, Dante Must Die mode, the mode that I wanted to play as Dante, has to be unlocked by playing Son of Sparta mode. So you know that I have beaten the game to have unlocked this mode. And there's also a report card feature which tells you the ranking you gotten for each level. So it will tell you if you skipped any levels, it'll tell you what ones you haven't played. So why not just let me do that then? And, oh god, I'm making a bigger deal of this than it really is. But when you've played through the game 14 times, you kind of want to play it your way. You might be thinking, wait a second, there's not 14 difficulties, so why 14? Well, because beating the game means you've basically played it twice. But even still, there's not 7, so what are those other things I'm talking about?
Well, that's because in the special edition you can also play as Virgil, Lady, and Trish. Virgil plays very similar as he does in 3, but with a few more attacks and combos. He also now has a concentration meter, which is like an additional style meter that increases his attack speed and damage. And instead of his teleport, he has a small projectile that he shoots out and makes him teleport to the enemy. And what's the difference between the two? Well, in 3 you could choose to teleport above the enemy or to the enemy or to the ground. In this you can just go to the enemy, but I prefer it because it also works as a dodge and an aerial reset, with the added bonus of him looking kinda goofy in some boss fights.
But yeah, not that much more has been added to him, but at the same time you didn't really need more.
There's also Lady and Trish who have their own campaign, where you play as Lady in the Nero levels and as Trish in the Dante levels. Lady is very unique in the fact that I found her melee attacks not so great, so I was mostly styling using her guns, which is very different from every other character. She is fun to play, takes a while to get used to, but her differences in play are what makes her fun. Even the fact that instead of getting a double trigger, she has an AoE grenade attack that changes how much damage and how much area covers depending on how full your DT gauge is. Then there's Trish, who plays a lot more traditionally. She still has a lot of things that make her unique, but you can feel that she's indeed using a sword that Dante used to have, which is not a bad thing in the slightest. Because even if her sword attacks are somewhat similar to Dante, or at least I felt that they were, she has a lot more to do than just sword attacks, as a good portion of her attacks are kick attacks, and since one of her attacks is to throw out her sword, she still has a full combo without it, which would mean that I would use it a lot because I can get multiple enemies in both the sword and her kicks.
However, as fun as those 3 characters are to play, they really do illustrate how bad the story mode is, especially when you play as Virgil.
Because he has no story cutscenes in his campaign, so you feel it super strongly when you are all of a sudden turned around and are forced to go back. Like, Lady and Trish at least have the benefit of changing characters, but it's still not great. I mean, at least Lady and Trish appear in the game, so there is some level of interaction they have with the main cast. It's at the beginning and at the end, but it's still there.
And you might be thinking, did they even come up with a reason as to why Virgil is here, why Virgil's going through these levels, even though he's supposed to be dead?
Well, they say that his version of the game is set in the past, before DMC3, which brings up a few questions. First, does that mean that everyone you fight in the main game has been killed before? Secondly, why does he go there? What's the point, and what's with this woman in red in his introduction cutscene? He walks past her and she swoons. What's that supposed to mean?
What do you mean that's Nero's mum? What do you mean Virgil's Nero's dad? When that happened?
The cutscene says a few decades ago, but how old was Virgil in DMC3? He was Dante's twin and he seemed pretty young.
Is there any official source on their ages? Like, it seems like there's a few, but the numbers seem pulled out of thin air. Like how in Dante is in Devil May Cry 2 is in his 30s, yet in his 40s in Devil May Cry 4, which is a game set before Devil May Cry 2. And that doesn't tell me how old they were in 3. Well, apparently Lady's of school age, whatever that means, so like late teens or something like that. And in 4 she's either around 25 or 30. And since Dante is in his 40s, that means he's about 10 years older than her, which means that at their youngest he would have been 26 and 3. That can't be right. Like, I'm not the only one that thought that Dante, even at a stretch, couldn't have been older than 22, right? I mean, maybe 19, early 20s, but late 20s, what? Wait a minute, the games are set in 1980s Europe. Like, I guess that makes sense, with 4 basically being set in the Vatican and 1 being in a European castle, but I just assumed these big action heroes who eat lots of pizza were American, but I guess that's on me. And 1980s, really? Yeah, there's no new technology, but there's time passed in their games. They can't all be set within the same decade. I guess they just don't care, which is why they said Dante is older in 4 than he is in 2. And just reading all this stuff said by the developers seems to be that they just don't really care. They just kind of do what they think is cool and what would make for an interesting story. And plus there's also the fact that according to the Devil May Cry fan theories about how old Dante is, there's a lot of stuff that retcons his age anyway, so all the things I just saw there, you can throw that in the bin.
All that really matters is that Nero is Virgil's son, which is why he can use the Yamato so well and why he can fix it by absorbing into his arm. Would have been nice if the game mentioned it. The only reason anyone knows about this fact is because it's said in the art book. I feel that something like Nero being the grandson of Sparta isn't something that should be relegated to an interesting tidbit. There are hints, so there might have been plans to make a bigger deal of it, but it just never came to be. Because the story is about the church being evil and Nero saving his girlfriend and Dante is just helping out because it's his job, and Sparta is who they worship, but neither of those things really come into it.
As I said before, it feels like there was supposed to be a lot more, but it just got cut out or left out or something happened. And it really brings this game down, kind of makes it feel unfinished as a whole. And you can just feel that in everything this game does. From playing the same 9 levels twice, fighting the same 4 bosses 3 times, once as Nero, once as Dante, then again as Nero because the last final level is a boss rush. And it's just spiced up by a board game that is not very fun to do. And then you triple this when you add in the special edition characters. And because of all that, I really have to give this game a 4 out of 4 because my god is it fun! This game is a blast to play. Sure, the levels and stuff like that could have been spiced up a bit, but this game is min-maxed to all hell with it maxing out combat. And I just love playing this game. I've put in a lot of time through the different difficulties, and I've sunk so much time into bloody palettes as all the characters and just keep playing it and playing it and playing it. And I just adore this game. I feel that, yeah, 3 is better because it's a better game overall, it's more cohesive, but this game's gameplay, I feel, is a lot better than 3's. And with that, the only game left we have is Devil May Cry 5, which is going to be coming out soon. I still have a month away, or one more review to do, but just, unfortunately, I kind of planned this wrong, because there's just no game for me to do between this game and Devil May Cry 5. Because there's no other Devil May Cry games that came out. What? What reboot? Oh. 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 With that, I've been Harsho, and this was VG Therapy.